Today, we're honored to welcome Elroy Jespersen, the brainchild behind the Village Langley, Canada's first dementia village. After spending 2 decades of his life in beautiful Alberta, Elroy moved to BC to escape the cold and attend university. He graduated from UBC in 1975 with a degree in community recreation and spent the next 15 years working in both public and private organizations managing community recreation facilities, including senior centers. In 1989, he changed careers and joined Diversicare, now Verve Senior Living, as their first employee in Western Canada and as GM of a seniors residence under construction in Richmond, British Columbia. Over the next 30 years, he was given an increasing opportunity and responsibility and was involved in the development, construction, and operation of numerous senior living facilities across Western Canada. As his retirement approached, he felt that there was one more project that needed to be done, developing a different type of community where people living with dementia could live their best life and thrive. In 2019, the Village Langley welcomed its first visitors and villagers, and Elroy retired as Verve's Vice President of Senior Operations. He now spends some of his time volunteering as President, Friends of the Village, a nonprofit society whose mandate is to promote and support other organizations in developing a village in their community, which is how I had the pleasure of meeting Elroy. Tanse Elroy, welcome to the Dementia Collective.
Thank you, Andy. I'm glad to be here.
So let's just take a second to start at the beginning. You grew up in Alberta before moving to BC. What early experiences shaped your interest in community recreation, eventually working in seniors care?
Well, I had a very unique upbringing because my parents ran a children's home outside of Wetaskiwin called Bethany Homes for Children, where they would have children who needed a more stable home for whatever reason could come and live with them. So I grew up, my first 18 years of life, I grew up surrounded by a whole lot of other kids and a large family. And so this whole idea of congregate living, collective living, creating some sort of a community where you shared with people, where you had responsibility, was something that was very natural to me. So when I look back and think about that, I've been asked, and I agree, I think that kind of shaped sort of the direction that I went with my career. And, I always enjoyed sports and different things like that. So I started thinking, well, maybe I could have a job in community recreation, helping people organize fun stuff. So that's where I started focusing. And then I wanted, as you said, I wanted to escape the cold winter. So I headed into West, where it's a bit warmer, and enrolled in UBC to start my career.
So how did you make the connection from you want to do recreation to you want to be involved with seniors and navigating living with seniors and building that relationship with seniors? How did you go from one to the other?
Well, when I went to UBC and I got a degree in community recreation, and then I started working for the cities, for example, like the city of Edmonton. I worked for the city of Richmond, where I was involved with running a community center, but then I also had a job of being responsible for the senior center. So I became very familiar with a place where community seniors would gather to be involved in a variety of things and get a variety of services. And so that sort of got me thinking about the older population. Then I kind of did a detour, moved into the Okanagan, went into private business and ran a senior racquetball center and fitness center And that sort of gave me my introduction to business and what to do and certainly what not to do. And after doing that for 5 or 6 years, I moved back to Vancouver and worked for the Vancouver Parks Board, which is their community recreation department, and ran several different community centers. And during that time, I started questioning whether my career in community recreation was going to be going where I thought it could and should go. And then one day I saw an advertisement for somebody to run a senior center that was being constructed in Richmond, where I was living at the time. And I thought, well, I know about a little bit about seniors. I know about buildings. I know about running an operation. I know very little about healthcare. So I thought, well, maybe this is some area where I could develop a career. And so I applied for the job, and I told, the people interviewing me, I thought I could learn something. I thought I could bring something. And if in 5 years I still was here, I was going to leave and find something else. So as it turned out, I was hired, and that started my career in senior living, operating, managing senior centers. And then I started getting into the development of different senior communities around Western Canada for 25 years.
Would you say that there are any specific lessons you learned early on post-graduation that really were formative in your trajectory of personalized seniors care and living the best life? Do you think there was any sort of lessons or specific lessons that occurred that helped you understand that's the direction that you want to lead or leave your legacy?
Um, I started, well, being in private business, you learn very quickly that you need to be customer focused. You need to focus on the people who are paying the fees that you charge in order for you to live. So that really started me thinking about everybody is a unique person. Everybody has unique interests and abilities, and I need to understand how I can support and help those. So when I moved back into senior recreation again, I started trying to focus more on, let's do something that is more personalized, as opposed to, let's organize a fitness class and we're going to judge the success of that by the numbers we get, as opposed to the outcomes that we achieve for each person. So I think that was one lesson that I learned about if you want to be successful, if you want to be successful for yourself as well as for your customer, you have to really learn to look at a market of one and say, what can I do in order to serve that market, that person?
Was there anything that occurred in your career early on when you started working in this seniors community that said that what was being done before wasn't sufficient, wasn't working, especially for individuals living with dementia?
Not early in my career. It was as I got into operating and developing, and again, I had little or no experience working with healthcare, so that was new to me. But I started seeing people who were struggling for whatever reason. And a lot of that was because of cognitive decline. And I didn't, I didn't know any better. I knew what I knew from what was out there. But as time went on, the more we did, the more it stayed the same. And so that's where I started thinking, there has to be a different way. And it was basically because no matter how nice we built the places for seniors to live, we still would create locked, secure dementia units. We still would isolate people. And I'm thinking that's not the way I would want to live. And I'm sure that's not the way anybody would want to live, but what options are there? So I said there has to be other places doing other things. So I started doing research and reading, and that's where I discovered the greenhouse model in the US, and that's where I discovered De Hogewey in the Netherlands. And I'm thinking, okay, they have elements of what they're doing that I think might really be better and make things work better. So I started doing a deeper dive into that, and that's where my thought of let's create a village started to formulate.
So, looking at it from Verve's lens, who was the company that created it with you, that's a bold and revolutionary choice, right? Going against the grain, creating something that in Canada that's never been done before. How did you frame this up to them as an organization that's conventionally healthcare? It would probably be shocking and kind of scary to go against the norm. So how did you frame it up to them?
Well, again, that was a bit unique. When the way Verve operates, Verve is primarily a management company where they manage retirement communities, long-term care communities for themselves, but mainly for other people, other investors. They become the operator. So when I joined Verve initially, there was a core group of investors that had invested in this one project. And so I started working with those investors, and they built another one, and then they built another one, and then they were, several of them were developers, so that's what they knew. Well, where can we build? So as I started investigating and imagining what could be, I started talking about this to people, including the investors. And, thank goodness, some of them said, hey, that sounds interesting. Let's, tell me more. And so it was this group of investors who, listened to my story, trusted me because I'd worked with them for 25 years. And fortunately, my projections more or less turned out right. So when I said, here's what we could do, and here's what that would mean from a financial point of view, from a service point of view, they said, okay, let's go. Now, Verve, I guess, whose corporate office is in Ontario, because I was in a position I was in, I had a fair bit of latitude to move about and do things that they weren't necessarily needing to stamp and approve. And so if the investors wanted to do it, then they were all in as long as they were managing. And so I had said to them, the CEO at the time, I said, I don't know if you're going to manage the village. It's going to be quite different, and you're going to have to learn to do different because we can't do many of the same things we do other places. And even though they acknowledged that, it was and is a struggle to have a big corporation or any corporation do a one-off.
So really, it seems that the investors were kind of the catalyst that helped drive it forward. Hey?
Yeah, they put their money in, and because they were developers, one of the investors, development company, was the developer and drove it, and Verve was sitting there through me on the sidelines, giving input into it, ready to operate it when it was done. So it wasn't a whole lot of Verve saying, "Oh, we're going to do something different." It's okay, what are you doing? And let's hope it works and we'll manage it if it does. So there was a lot of faith and hope going into this.
Wow. And did the developers, did they have some sort of dementia experience with their family so they could draw on? Or was this I see an interesting opportunity here to be part of something new? How did they come out?
Well, initially they didn't have uh, uh, when we first started in 2014, looking for some land and talking about the idea, they didn't really have any direct experience. But subsequent to that, once we started moving, uh, a couple of the investors from our investor group developed dementia and are now living with dementia. And so and because this investor group is very much a family based, their kids really started seeing the impact the village could do for people who are living with dementia. So that quickly became a more personalized tie-in than what it was when we started. I think when we started, it was, hey, this is unique. Nobody's doing anything like this. Why wouldn't we want to do it and make sure? Because if we do it right, then it'll be something absolutely unique. And so that's where they started. But very quickly, I think they learned that, personally, it can help a lot of people.
So the village in Langley opened in 2019, right? 2019.
Yeah.
So what were the biggest challenges in bringing this to life in practice? You've already addressed the Verve having a different operational model based on all our experience. What other things were really, really difficult that you guys kind of went through?
Initially, when I started imagining it, I talked about the greenhouse model, which is called small house model of 10 to 12 people living collectively in a very residential sized house. So I had visited several in the US and taken workshops and whatnot. So I was feeling fairly comfortable that we could do a greenhouse or two. But then my experience with Dehogave showed me that the community and developing community, engaging people in community and supporting community was equally as important. And having grown up, in Alberta and in the children's home and being on 42 acres of land, I, spent most of my time as a kid outdoor exploring. And so I knew that connecting with nature and being outdoors and engaging in sort of the natural order of things was also important. So we knew that we needed a larger piece of land and we didn't know how large. Our architects, when we explained to them, said maybe 2 to 3 acres we could do something. So we started looking for land, and given the price of land on the West Coast, certainly going up in the metropolitan areas, we almost gave up because nothing seemed to work for the price we had to pay. So by a stroke of luck, we saw Langley School District was selling closed school sites for them, and we looked at them, and the one we're on now was 7 acres, and we thought we could do something with 7 acres. So we were fortunate enough to put in a bid, and we got we're the winning bid, and that's how we acquired that piece of property. But initially it was a property because we didn't want to compromise sort of what the vision was, and we knew that if we went to a half acre, we could do a piece of it, but we couldn't do the whole thing. And one of the things that um, happened early on when I would be talking about this village that I was imagining, people would get all excited and say, oh, that sounds great. Where can I see it? And I said, well, you can't because it's not done yet. And so one of our purposes was to build it and demonstrate to people that there is, in our opinion, a better way to support people living with dementia. And so if we were going to do it half measure, then we couldn't really demonstrate to them what is possible. So that's why it took a couple years for us to find that piece of land, and it was only by, I guess, divine guidance that it happened to arrive just when we were actively searching.
And I mean, having been there, it's such a nice property because it's such so peaceful and the community around is so quiet. So it's such a great place for it, right? Versus some other metropolitan areas that are really loud and happening. It's such a peaceful area for the residents, right?
Well, right. I mean, the conventional wisdom is in senior living. When I was building things, you need to pick a site that has a lot of visibility, high traffic area. People drive by and notice it and say, oh, this is what it is. This is where I'll go. And we're quite contrary to that. We say, no, we don't want to be in a high traffic area. We want to be in an area that's very residential, that's very peaceful, that's well, has a lot of nature around. And fortunately, this site, had large trees around three sides of it, and it was a big space that we could work with. So, if we hadn't found it, I'm sure we would have tried and would have done something different, but I don't think it would have turned out the way it is. And so we were just fortunate that this site was one, and there was concern about, Langley, is there a market in Langley? And when we had to go and get financing and whatnot, they want a market research and a survey done about people living in the area. And I said, I know there's not enough people in Langley to support this, but it's sort of like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And so we had to kind of make that case, and it's certainly proven out that people will travel, families, up to an hour to come and visit mom or dad living at the village, just because the village is the place they want them to be.
What would you say distance-wise would be the furthest that some people have wanted to move their family from to live there?
Well, I wouldn't want to go more than what we are, and I think so. If one could find a place where you could draw people 45 minutes, I'll use that as opposed to distance because it depends on where you're driving, 45 minutes from all directions, that's probably not a bad place to do. I guess what really got me thinking about if you build it, they will come. When I was involved in operating community centers, and we were operating through Verve, a place in Calgary, I had one of the family members of somebody talk about how they had moved their mother into a little, and I don't know the community, but they had moved their mother from Calgary into this community that was like 2 hours away. And they said, we did that because it's the absolute best place for her. And we've committed that a family member would drive there, each one 3 times a week, to see her. And I'm thinking, okay, if this person's going to drive 2 hours because the place is so great, there must be something to that. So that kind of always stuck in my mind about, I'm not going to worry too much about how close it is if we can create the right place that people will come to. And as it turns out, we've had people, one that sticks in my mind, we had a couple move from Toronto to the village. The wife had dementia, the husband didn't, and he rented an apartment close by so that she could live there. So people will come if you build the right thing.
Yeah, I think you're right on the if you build it, they will come idea, right? People are looking for something different and something that can support people where they are, how they need. I think that the village model really personifies that. So how do you balance freedom of a village with the necessary safety and clinical consideration?
I mean, we had, again, when we started, I knew that I had this concept in my mind about kind of how this will work. And I'm not a highly detailed person. I'm more of a conceptual thinker. So, but I also realize that in order to make things work, you got to figure out the details. So I knew that I needed a whole lot more detailed people than me helping me do this. So I thought, but I also need them all to understand the vision and what is important and what we need to focus on. So I attempted to write what I called the Village Manifesto, and which was sort of a brain dump about here is everything you need to know about this future village. We all need to know so that we all can focus on the same thing. And so I came up with kind of 5 guiding principles. And the first one was be bold and be different. And if we weren't going to be bold and take risks and do things that people say we shouldn't and couldn't, and if we weren't going to do it differently, then we were going to be like everybody else. And we wanted to be different and we wanted to be unique. So we had to keep telling us, is this bold? Is this different? The second one was to make home. And so we had a whole discussion about what is home, and it's different things to different people, but there are certain elements that go into everybody's home. So we said we need to focus on making homes and not building facilities. And so the third one was think normal, natural, nature. And, you know, do normal things, do things that come naturally, and do it in nature. The fourth one was roam free. And it was, how can we support people moving about their community when they wish, as they wish, without any limitations that may restrict them from doing so, which ultimately came to say, we're all building our houses at grade, single story, because if we would put a second story on it, we could have doubled the population. And from a business point of view, that made nothing but perfect sense. But from a principle point of view of having people get up, walk out the front door, move around the village, and getting back in without hitting a curb or a step or an elevator, we had to do that if we really honored our principles. And then the last one was, it's always visitor-directed living, supported through person-centered care. And so it was always about each villager directing their own day with us, the team, supporting them through care. So one of the things, and the site we selected really lent itself to having boundaries that were natural. We had big trees around the edge, and all we did was made sure that there was an 8-foot high cedar fence that kind of blended into the trees. At the front of our village, we put our community center, which was sort of the gathering place, the town square, and that was the single point of entry and egress, so we could monitor who's coming and going. So once you're through that door, you can roam, you can move about as you wish. And so it really, the site lent itself to having this natural community with paths and you know, things to go and visit and look at and engage with, without thinking that you couldn't go beyond this. And so that really hasn't been an issue for most people. On occasion, a new person moving in who wants to be anywhere but there, no matter what it is, there's some challenges initially to have them feel comfortable, but once that happens, and it's usually a few days, then there is no issue. There is no people wanting to leave.
One of the things that really stuck to me most when I was there was the animals in the back. Can you talk about that decision, especially the idea to have animals in a facility like this? Can you talk about that and how that happened and the impact that that's had?
Sure. Again, I'm as I said, I'm a conceptual person, so I didn't really think, even though I grew up on a bit of a farm and I had to get up in the morning and milk cows and feed chickens, I kind of had an understanding of what a small farm needed to do. And so it was probably based on that understanding that I knew that we couldn't immediately put a bunch of animals there. We had to kind of evolve into that. So when we were building, we told our builder we needed to have a farm, and he said, "Oh, I'll build you a barn." And so he built us a barn. And we said, "Oh, we want to have gardens and stuff. So, oh, I'll plant a bunch of fruit trees and put in some rows for you to plant gardens." And that was that. So we didn't think much beyond that, but our focus initially was, let's get people in, let's get them comfortable, let's get them supported. And initially we had a few staff people say, "Oh, I don't know anything about animals. What, you want me to feed, feed a chicken? I don't know about that." So we said, okay, let's back off and let's just go slow. And part of it was we needed to find somebody who we felt could take ownership of the animals and the farm. And always we imagined that we would have a live-in care person who could be that sort of extra set of eyes and hands 24/7. And so we built in a one-bedroom suite above our store. And we thought, well, if we could find somebody where we could exchange living in our suite for time caring for the animals, that would be the best of both worlds. So fortunately, 2, 3 years ago, we found somebody who would do that. And they were connected to a not-for-profit called Happy Herds, who ran a farm animal sanctuary close by. And so they said, well, and the lady Sharon, who was our caretaker at the time, said, "I'm arriving with 4 chickens." So she brought the chickens, and Happy Herd says, "We have a couple of pygmy goats that need a new home." So we got the goats, and away we went. And so there wasn't a lot of defined thought to that. So we had to kind of modify our barn a bit and build a chicken run and whatnot. And we then started seeing the impact that engaging with animals and gathering the eggs and feeding the chickens could have for people living there who really connected with that. So since that time, we've really started to focus on a concept called green care farming. And that came from Europe, where small farmers who had a small farm would invite people living with dementia to come and engage with farming activities during the day as part of a day program, and then they'd go home in the evening. And so we said, can we take that concept and not only use it to figure out what we could and should do, but also bring in people from the external community on a day basis to experience that. So we're in the midst now of implementing green care farming practices. I say to people, we're now turning into a green care village, where people are in a village, they are involved in outdoor, green, natural activities, and we will grow that. So this summer was our first day program that we started, and that's the plan, is to grow that. And we have McMaster University and Simon Fraser University doing some research with some research assistants there, gathering data about the impact that will have. So I'm very bullish on, and that's even more so to the space, bullish on incorporating outdoor plants, animals, you know, activities that you can do in nature, because that's as equally, if not more important than the medication you give somebody in their body.
I remember when I was there with you and we were walking through, you told me this story about the clock right outside Elroy's cafe and bar. Can you talk to us about that story now? Because that story still sticks with me personally, and it helps really move it in my heart of the value of this. Can you talk to the folks here about?
Sure. Early on, when we had been open maybe a month or 6 weeks, I arrived at the village, and they said, the team said to me, "Oh, Elroy, we'd like you to introduce you to this new villager named Don, who had seemed a bit agitated." And so they introduced me, and he said, "My name is Don so and so, LLB, and my favorite friend is Sue. And if you don't let me out of this place, I'm going to sue your ass off." And I said, "Oh, okay. Why do you want to leave?" And so that started a dialogue of Don engaging with things. And Don initially would uh, come in first thing in the morning, and he'd go to our store and he'd grab 2 liters of chocolate milk, and he'd throw some money on the counter and say, "Is that enough?" And we'd say, "Oh yeah, sure, that's good, Don." And he'd take his chocolate milk, and away he went. But we also had right next to the store a workshop where we had a community volunteer who was living in a wheelchair, who would come and putter and make little things. And so Don started stopping in and figuring out, what's happening. And Lloyd, the volunteer, would say, "Hey, do you know how to sand? Why don't you sand this?" And he would slowly engage Don into doing something. So that really became a part of Don's daily routine, where he'd go get his chocolate milk, stop in at the workshop, engage with Lloyd, and do something. And so they worked with our life enrichment manager, and they said, "What can we do that would improve the village?" And so Lloyd, who was quite creative, he said, "Well, we can make a clock, and we can make a art piece that goes over the fireplace." So collectively, they created those 2 things, and unveiled the 2 pieces of art, the clock and the above the mantle. And Lloyd was never so proud of doing that. Never having worked with his hands, being a lawyer and being a business person and whatnot, he found something where he could do a lot of things. He could engage with something. He found a friend. He found a purpose. Um, he found a way of giving back. And Lloyd became the Santa Claus at Christmas. He helped deliver groceries to the houses. And it really changed his life. That's one. We have 75.
Yeah, and I mean, even telling that story again, it moves me, and that is my most vivid memory from when I was with you there was hearing that and seeing the clock itself and the work that he made and the fact that it changed the trajectory. I think that's the value of these sort of, I don't want to say institutions or facilities, these places, right, where people collect,
Communities.
congregate,
They're
communities. Yeah,
communities.
absolutely, 100%, 100%. Um, so sometimes people voice feedback, though, that these type of communities or places are too expensive to live at, like the village, and that I've heard that that they say these places shouldn't exist in Canada. What would you say to these people?
I would say that if you want something that is better and different than what is out there, it's going to cost some money to build. It's going to cost money to operate, and it's going to cost money to return a modest return to the investors that put in many millions of dollars to get it started. And so the problem with the systems that we have in Canada is that all people understand is what they have to pay in order to live somewhere or do whatever. And so most often it's, tied to some degree to income, but most often it's a few $1,000s a month to live in a place that probably most people wouldn't really choose to live, but have to live because there's no other option. So what you don't understand, and I understand it because I was on the provider side, is that in addition to what you pay, and let's say you're paying $3,000, the provider probably receives another $7,000 or $8,000 from the government in order to make sure that you can live there for $3,000. And so it costs. Our place, when you pay staff and you pay staff, which is the biggest expense you have, a fair and reasonable salary, it costs money. When you talk to the government and ask them to partner with you and help support you, and they choose not to, somebody has to pay. And so fortunately, in our case, we believed that there were enough people who had the means and the wealth that given the right option, they could choose to pay or not. And fortunately, many people said, I'm in. Nobody's getting rich on the village. People are getting a modest return on their investment. But what we've created is something that I think could ultimately help change the way we support and provide care to older people, and especially older people living with dementia. So yes, it costs money. Yes, many people can't afford it. Yes, I hope the government will partner with other people like myself to make it more affordable. But until that happens, people are going to have to dig into their own pocket. But guess what? They can choose to or not to. They don't have to. When you're in the system, you have no choice. You have to go there if you want any care at all.
So, for the folks that say, I can't afford it or I don't want to afford it, but I want the best care for my loved one, how do you think they can apply the principles of the village to their loved one if they're not necessarily at the village?
I guess the other piece I haven't spoken about is when we, I talked about our principles, but we knew there were 4 components that we needed to bring to bear for the village to achieve what we believed it could. And the first one was our mindset, our view of what the village is. And we really didn't want to be known as a healthcare community. We wanted to be known as a community. And so we talked about this concept of enriched living. And enriched living is sort of our focus. We want to think, what can we do to enrich the lives of the people who live at the village? And so our philosophy, our paradigm is looking at something that the Eden Alternative Organization came up with called the domains of well-being. And it's well-being, there are They came up with 7. We have 10 elements that every single person, you, me, anybody else, need in our life in order to achieve a sense of well-being. And it's things like you need to be known, you need to have your identities known and honored and respected. You need to be connected to things that and people that are really important to you. You need to feel safe and secure. You need to have agency and autonomy. You need to learn and grow. You need to be able to support and serve your community. And that's a two-way street. You need to have a reason to get out of the bed in the morning. You need to have something to hope for. You need to feel comfortable enough and to engage with your day, and you need to experience moments of joy. That's it. For a long time, I struggled. Where does healthcare fit into this paradigm? Because certainly there are people who are getting and need a whole lot of what normally we would call healthcare. And then I began to realize that the purpose of healthcare is to get people comfortable enough to engage with their day. We're not going to cure people of Alzheimer's. We're not going to have somebody who has congestive heart failure to not have that. What we can do is make them comfortable enough to engage with their day. And if we can do that, then they can start experiencing moments of joy. So that whole paradigm, I think if people who can't live there and any other place, if they would say, yes, healthcare is important, but that is a means to an end. And our end is to enrich the lives of the people by doing these things, personalizing the experience for them, then that would make a place where people would want to live. And so I think by taking that mindset, switching your mindset and saying, yes, my loved one needs care, but really what they want to do is live their best life. So let's figure out what that is and help them do that. That's what makes us a place that's desirable or not. And quite frankly, many places do not do that very well. And that doesn't cost money to do. Now, the second part is having the right place makes it easier to do. And I think we've done a reasonable job of getting the right place. The third pillar is finding the right people. And that is a continual struggle because you need to get those people to understand that what they do and how they do it and when to do it might be quite different in the last place they worked. And the fourth one is you need to find partners, because without partners, the right partners who all understand what you're doing and support what you're doing and bringing their own expertise and resources to the table, it's not going to happen. But if you get those 4 pieces in place, then I think amazing things can happen. And even if you can't get the right place, you can make the place you have a lot better by focusing on those other 3 things.
Yeah. And so all the amazing things that you've done and the village has done, it put the Village Langley on an international stage. So for those that don't know, you and the village were featured in National Geographic, which is an amazing testament to the impact that was had. What did this recognition mean for you and for the community?
What I learned is the media is starved for a good news story. The media is also, unfortunately, the word dementia is kind of in vogue in the media. And the prime reason, not the only reason, the prime reason we call the Village Langley a dementia village is that it really caught people's attention. If you're on social media, that word, they search for dementia and it pops up. but I struggled with, and that's why we don't necessarily use the term dementia village. I struggle with naming a village after a disease, just as we don't have cancer centers and arthritic villages and what mental health villages. We shouldn't have a dementia village. We should have a village that no matter what your limitations or abilities, you can live and feel comfortable. And so I like the term green care village, because what it does, it says it's green. Naturally, you're thinking of nature and whatnot. Care, yes, there is some sort of support and care and village, and that it's a community. And I think, so once we got some media contact, nowadays it spreads around the world. So people started saying, I want to come and see it. I want to interview you. I want to do this. And so that really spread around, and to the point where my summer has been spent showing people from Taiwan and the US and several places across Canada, the village, so that they can learn. They say, I want to come and learn what we can do. It'd be first week in September, we have two people coming from Belgium who operate a very old traditional care facility in Belgium, and they want to come and learn what they might be able to do that makes it more like the village. So what it does, it gets the word out that there are possibilities, there are options, there are ways that we can eat, everybody can improve, because it's really tough to start a new village, as I'm sure you understand. You just don't go out and say, I'm going to start a village. It takes a lot of things happening right. But that doesn't mean that you can't take what you have and make it better and more village-esque, if you will. And so I think what that does, it certainly is recognition, and that what we did was just not some wild idea that I had, but it was really something that resonated with a lot of people and continues to do. And I'm quite positive we're connected and working with a group in the States that are committed to doing, the first dementia village in Western US. And they have the resources and the land to do it. And so once they have the money and the land, then most obstacles you can get beyond. So I'm optimistic that in the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be another or other villages that people can look at.
Did it spark any conversations or resurgence with the healthcare bodies or healthcare entities? So say publicly funded healthcare. So in Alberta, it'd be AHS. I'm not sure what the one for BC would be, but did it spark conversations about that, bringing this to more mainstream?
I've had a number of senior health region officials tour the village. I've had members of the Legislative Assembly tour the village, and all of them think it's great. But to have a bureaucracy that is under strain, under stress, and is focusing on beds, change their ways and embrace a one-off innovative idea is a pipe dream. The only way I think it will slowly change is that more and more people who experience a village, whether through visits or whether having a family member there, challenge their elected officials to say, why can't we have this? Why aren't you doing this? Because that's what changes a bureaucracy. That's what changes the government, is public pressure. And I think the more people understand that there is a better way, there are options. There are ways to kind of change some of the things that are already happening to make it better. But what I unfortunately see is when the government is spending incredible amounts of money to build new facilities, I think the one positive thing, they are beginning to recognize the fact that if you can kind of crunch down units to 10 or 12 or 16 people, it's better than having 38 on a, on a floor. So they're looking to make it more like home, but they're stacking, one on top of the other, 6 or 8 stories high. They're still operating it the same way they've operated for the last 20 years in terms of how they deploy staff and whatnot. So it'll take time. But if people want to make radical changes, then you gotta figure out how to do it yourself and always invite government to help, but don't expect them to be partner with you. And my experience is where they show an interest, they say, oh, well, then we'll tell you what you need to do. And I say, you're not going to drive the bus. We'll drive the bus. You're welcome to sit on the bus and come with us, but you're not going to drive it.
I think this idea is so well explained in this one story I remember from when we were there. And the system in conventional health facilities are, if you're trying to get people in, they're so focused on you, or even at some other private facilities, when new people are coming in, they're so focused on the person who has the money, the person who's trying to contribute things. But I remember we were walking and there was a resident who needed something. I don't remember what they needed. And you left us to go and attend to what the resident needed, and you took them where they needed to go and help them. And it was so cool because the focus was on the residents. How do we make sure the residents are happy, felt valued, rather than the external person that's coming and looking to learn? That's not what's important. And I thought that really resonated with this idea that it focuses on the people. The people are what's important, not everything else that's happening around.
And I hope that everybody would do that, because that's what we aspire to do. We're fortunately in a situation, and I've been in the other situation because for 25 years I was involved in private pay senior living. I've been in other situations where you absolutely need people coming through the door and people choosing to live with you, and that is the one thing you think about from morning to night, because without that, the business isn't going to work. Fortunately, in the village, that is not an issue. We once all we had to do is tell people and show people who we are and what we are. And I've literally taken thousands of people through the village, and I have yet to hear one person say, I'm not sure if this is the type of place I or my loved one would like to live. Many said, oh, it's great, but I can't afford it. And I understand that. So we have, I don't know, 150 or 200 people on a wait list waiting to come into the village. So it's not a matter of us selling the village. It's not a matter of us, convincing somebody to live. It's a matter of us telling them there'll be a space available this day. Can you make sure you're ready to move your loved one in? And that's a real nice thing to have when you're running a business, that where you don't have to sell and so people can focus on the things that hopefully make you get to that point, like personalized support and service, being happy and friendly to people. So I guess what it shows me is, yeah, if you build the right thing, they will come. Build and operate the right thing.
So what would you say to policymakers and healthcare leaders and possibly bureaucrats as well, who might think that this approach is really cool? They say, Elroy, talk me through this. This is great, but I don't think we can do something like this. What would you say?
I'd say, I think you could. I think anybody could if you had the right partners, if you had the right land, if you had the right philosophy, and if you had the right support, it's possible. We showed it's possible. I guess when one of the things that motivated me to do this, um, I had a little personal experience with my wife's aunt who had dementia, who loved to walk, who couldn't find a place where she could live her best life. And so as I was getting close to retirement, I thought, I've been in the business for 25 years. I know it intimately in terms of what is good and what is not good. I've worked with teams developing new communities. So if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And if I say, oh, I'm retired and I'm done, it'll never get done. So I thought, at the very least, we need to show that it can be done. And we then need to show how doing it will make life better for the people who choose to live there. And my hope is that if enough people see that and understand it, they'll say, as I say, be bold. They'll be bold and say, we're going to do this, even though the government says we can't, even though we don't necessarily have the money right now. Because I know if you get the right story, there is money available for investment. You just have to grab the people, have them connect to your purpose. And so it's not easy, it's not quick, it's a process, but absolutely it can be done. We did it, and I'm no genius.
You're definitely a visionary, though, Elroy. I'll give you that. Looking back, what are you most proud of in this journey?
Probably what I just said, that we did it. We had the courage to keep going, and because we're a regulated environment, we had to dance through a few hoops and argue a few points and compromise in some areas, but I quite honestly feel that we didn't compromise our principles. And maybe one story I'll tell you, Andy, because you might remember it. When we wanted, before we opened, I was talking to the licensing officer about putting in a pond where I'd like to have people fish and whatnot. And she became quite horrified that people would drown. And we were about 3 weeks from saying we're going to be open. And so we thought, we can't fight this fight. So we said, okay, we're going to put in a rock garden, and we put in some rocks and gurgling stones and that sort of thing. And it was very underwhelming. A year ago, we said, we need a pond. And if we talk about nature and natural things, water and running water and connecting with water is extremely natural. And so why don't we have that? And so we said, we will. So we went, the investors agreed, and we tore out the rock garden and we put in a pond that has waterfalls and running water and koi fish, and people come and look at that, and there are plants growing on the pond, and it's a step closer to what we always envisioned, but felt we had to compromise in order to get the show on the road. So I'm proud that we were able to do this. I'll even be prouder when I see 6 or 8 other places happening around the world because of what we did. So I continue to say I'll help and I'll support others who want to do it as long as I'm able and capable. And hopefully I have a few years left to do that. But that's sort of my purpose, is to say we can't stop at one, because we know it's a better way forward.
I mean, you definitely done that. I mean, you were and still are a mentor to me, and helped motivate me to continue going down this road. So I do appreciate that. If you could give one message to families listening, many whom are struggling to find the right kind of care right now, what would that one message be?
Don't give up hope. You can learn a lot of things that you could do perhaps better to support your loved one in the environment where they are. I mean, I'm learning every week through connecting with people on social media, and there are a lot of people out there individually trying to make it better for people living with dementia. And there are tools that you can use. And I know you've had, Karen Terrell on your show, and somebody like Karen who has spent years working with families. There are supports that you can have to make it better, and it may not be ideal and it'll still be a challenge, but you don't have to give up hope. You don't have to say, I have no other option, but to put my loved one in a place where I wouldn't want to live, nor do I know they want to live. It may not be ideal, but it can be better. And so, if people need resources, we can connect them. I know very little myself, but I know a few people who know a lot. So, one of my purposes is to connect people to the right people who know the right people.
I think that's the beauty of it, right? Is that we don't have to know everything. We just have to know where to connect people to that can support. I think that's the beauty of it, and especially in the kind of space where we're in, people seem so receptive and wanting to help.
Yeah, no, that's where when I talk about partners, that's what I'm talking about. People who say, yeah, I can help and I can help for the right reason. It's not what I can get out of it. It's what I can give and how I can make the world better. And there are many partners out there. You just have to look for them. And I say to people who I said, you need to get your story. People respond to stories. They don't necessarily respond to facts or pictures. It's a story. And if you can get your story and tell it, believe it yourself and tell it in a way that's compelling, your partners will emerge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Elroy, again for joining us and showing us that dementia can be reimagined with dignity, freedom, and humanity at its core. To our listeners, thank you for being here. If today's conversation resonated with you, follow the Dementia Collective wherever you get your podcasts and share this episode with someone who might benefit. I know Elroy's story and the village in Langley really resonate with many of us, and we get a great idea of what can be done for people living with dementia. If you're on your own caregiving journey, remember though, you're not alone. We're here at BlueBell to help you connect, and we're here to help with the resources that truly fit your family's specific needs. Until next time, you are seen, you are strong, and you are doing something extraordinary. Thank you.